We are studying this evening in section 21, where Jesus makes his first disciples, coming from John chapter 1, verse 35 to 51. Section 21, Jesus makes his first disciples. John 1, 35 to 51. Again on the morrow, John was standing, and two of his disciples, and he looked upon Jesus as he walked, said, "Behold, the Lamb of God." And the two disciples heard him speak. They followed Jesus. And Jesus turned and beheld them following, and said unto them, "What seek ye?" And they said unto him, "Rabbi," which is to say, or being interpreted, "Teacher, where abidest thou?" He said, "Come, and ye shall see." They came therefore and saw where he abode, and they abode with him that day. It was about the 10th hour. One of the two that heard John and followed him was Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. He findeth first his brother Simon, his own brother Simon, and said unto him, "We have found the Messiah," which is being interpreted Christ. He brought him unto Jesus. Jesus looked upon him and said, "Thou art Simon, son of Jonah. Thou shalt be called Cephas," which is by interpretation Peter. On the morrow he was minded to go forth unto Galilee, and findeth Philip. And Jesus said unto him, "Follow me." Now Philip was from Bethsaida, of the city of Andrew and Peter. Philip findeth Nathanael, and said unto him, "We have found him of whom Moses and the law and the prophets wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." And Nathanael said unto him, "Can any good thing come out of Nazareth?" Philip said to him, "Come and see." Jesus saw Nathanael coming to him, and said of him, "Behold, an Israelite indeed, his whom is no guile." Nathanael said unto him, "Whence knowest thou me?" Jesus answered and said unto him, "Before that Philip called thee, when thou wast under the fig tree, I saw thee." Nathanael answered and said unto him, "Rabbi, thou art the Son of God, thou art the King of Israel." Jesus answered and said unto him, "Because I said unto thee, I saw thee underneath the fig tree, believest thou? Thou shalt see greater things than these." And he said unto him, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, ye shall see heaven open, and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man." So rather lengthy reading there, but it all comes out of the same set of passages in the first chapter of John. This is an area that, again, I just want to take a moment to say that many times when we see Jesus come along and some of the other writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, Jesus comes along and sees these individuals and says, "Come follow me," and they just drop their nets and stop what they're doing and start following him. Some have believed that, this just happened in some kind of magical way, but in reality, those whom Jesus ultimately called to follow him and to go with him had been with him, had seen him, had talked with him. And so when the time came for him to begin a more formal ministry, he had already chosen and talked with many of these who came later to be known as apostles, as well as others who followed, which were disciples. And so as Jesus is back and he is in the area, the region, preaching and again talking about the kingdom, we see the overlapping time of John and Jesus. And this is part of what we were discussing before when we talked about the fact that John was making it easier for Jesus to get some of these first disciples that began to follow him, because John had already kind of trained them and got their minds thinking about the coming of the kingdom. And so here in this passage we see that John was standing and he was with two of his disciples. And Jesus, as he walked by, he pointed out, saying, "Behold, the Lamb of God." And the two disciples heard him speak. They followed Jesus. And so here is a perfect example of how John set things up so that when Jesus started his earthly ministry, it wasn't from scratch. We have people who were trusting John. They had listened to his preaching about the kingdom of heaven. And so when Jesus was baptized and after he came out of the wilderness and the temptation, and as he started going forth, we find John in the area pointing and directing his disciples to Jesus. And it's interesting, he has these two disciples and he tells them, this is the Lamb of God. Now, they started following Jesus. And so, that's a strange statement. And so we have to understand by what he said to them and how they responded to that John had already been talking about some of these things which were going to come about, that the Christ was coming, the Messiah, the Savior, the Son of God. Some of these aspects that they seem to rather quickly pick up on, maybe it's not as quick as some of us think it is. When Jesus later was asking, "Who do men say that I am? Who do you say that I am?" A lot of the answers and the opinions, the foundation that they were working on, was some of the things that John the Baptist had already been teaching. And of course, as we'll see, John was quite aware that he must decrease and Jesus must increase. And so part of that was passing his disciples off to Jesus and to point them in the right way. His journey, his mission was to prepare the way of the Lord. And so when the Lord came and when he started his ministry, it was obvious that he needed to point them out. And of course, in previous lessons, we've talked about the fact that, with Jesus' baptism, John saw the Spirit come down and light upon him, heard the voice out of heaven, and John had been told that the one who he saw the Spirit descend upon and remain, he was the one who was the Messiah, the chosen one of Israel. And so he witnessed that. Jesus went off to the temptation, but when he comes back and he begins to move about and to interact with others, here we have these two disciples that John says, "Behold, the Lamb of God." This is the one whom we have been discussing. This is the one who we've been talking about. And these two who heard him followed Jesus. And again, three people standing on a street and we make a comment about somebody, doesn't necessarily mean two of them are just going to automatically start following them. But if you've been properly prepared and you've been looking and waiting and told that something special is coming, there's some special things that are about to happen, especially that has to do with the Messiah, the Christ, the redemption of Israel, all these things that the Old Testament had prophesied. And so they begin to follow Jesus. He points John points him out to these two, and so they began to follow him. And so Jesus turned and beheld them following, and said unto them, What seek ye? Now, we know from verses that's going to continue on down through here that he wasn't taken by surprise, and he wasn't worried that they were looking to get him off in a back alley somewhere and rob him. That's not what he was asking. But he does ask an interesting question. You know, what are you seeking? What are you looking for? What do you want? And so that's another interesting question. They're following him, and they said unto him, Rabbi, which is to say, Teacher, where abidest thou? And so these disciples of John ask Jesus, they want to see, or they want to know where he abides. If this is the person that John has been telling them about, they want to see. And in the customs of the time, and it's sometimes obscured to us today, but in the time that the scriptures are written, especially here, hospitality was an important thing for travelers and people, and many times someone would, again, strangers would knock on your door and ask if there is a place that they could stay for the night, and they would basically invite themselves into your home. And it was expected, because sometimes people's lives depended on it, that hospitality was shown. And so many times people were invited, and sometimes they invited themselves, asking for hospitality. And so when they ask, he says, What are you looking for? Or what seek ye? And they said, Where do you abide? Or where are you at? Or where are you staying? And so Jesus, in the custom of tradition, says, Come and see. Come join me. Come join me. And so he extends to them an invitation, in essence, of hospitality. And as we come down through here, we'll see that it was at the 10th hour. And so we're coming into the evening. It would be about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And so we're coming into about 4 in the afternoon, moving toward evening, and what we think of as dinner, supper, or whatever, and however you want to think of that. And so Jesus was heading back for his evening meal, no doubt, to assemble back with some that he was perhaps staying with. We don't have a lot of information right now necessarily about that, but he extends an invitation to come, and ye shall see, or come and see. And so they came, therefore, and saw where he abode, and they abode with him that day. It was about the 10th hour. And so, looking at this, some people look at it from the standpoint of Roman time, which, if that was the case, it would be 10 o'clock in the morning. And so if it was Jewish time, it would be 4 o'clock in the evening. And so one of the things sometimes about scriptures is it's hard to tell sometimes whether we're talking about Roman time or whether we're talking about Jewish time. And so it says that they continued with him, or they stayed with him that day. Some have commented that this very well could have been in the morning, and they spent the day with him. And some, and seeing the fact that they spent that day, and not that evening, but that day, that this would be more likely 10 o'clock in the evening, or 10 o'clock in the morning by Roman time. Brother McGarvey is inclined, he says, to accept the latter as correct, that it was 10 a.m. But whether it's 10 a.m. or whether it's 4 p.m., they got to spend time with him to see where he was. And one of the two that heard him, that heard John speak and followed him, was Andrew, which is Simon Peter's brother. It's interesting how things work in life. It wasn't Peter that was with John. We don't know exactly where Peter was. We could make certain guesses, but he wasn't there with them. But Andrew, who was Simon Peter's brother, introduced, in essence, Peter to Jesus. And so it's interesting that John introduces Andrew and the other to their to his brother, or he introduces his disciples to Jesus, and then those disciples likewise, after having seen Jesus and been with Jesus, began to introduce others. And so very early on, we see really the basis of what we come to think of as the gospel. One person introduces somebody else to Jesus through the preaching and teaching of the gospel, and then those people in turn introduce somebody else to Jesus. And what starts out as just a couple people following Jesus begins to expand till we see that he had 12 disciples who he chose as apostles. And it's clear from other places that there were more people that were with him than just the 12 as disciples and following him. So one of those who followed was Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. And so we're told that he findeth first his own brother Simon, and said unto him, We have found the Messiah, which is the Christ. And so it's interesting that, when you have some exciting news, who do you want to share that with? And especially when it comes to having found the Messiah and having spent time with Jesus and finding him. And it's interesting, it says that after having told him that, he brought him unto Jesus. And so he literally brought him to Jesus. But as we look at, again, as I said, the gospel and the way in which the gospel is shared, that's what we do. We introduce people to Jesus, and through the teaching of the scriptures, we bring them to Jesus. We start by introducing Jesus, who he is, what he's done, and then in the process of time, we want to bring them to Jesus, to bring them into a relationship, which we think of as salvation or, being saved. And so he brings him to Jesus, and Jesus looked upon him and said, Thou art Simon, the son of Jonah. Thou shalt be called Cephas, which is by interpretation Peter. And so as we look at this, in some translations, and we've discussed this before, which I see as a flaw in some of the so-called older and better, and this is one of those places where in the newer translations, instead of referring to him as Simon, son of Jonah, they call him Simon, son of John. And John and Jonah are two different names. And so we know in the other scriptures that Peter is referred to as Simon Bar Jonah, or Simon, the son of Jonah, and that this particular place, for whatever reason, some of the people copying somewhere along the way on some of those scrolls, at least in my opinion, for what that's worth, made a mistake and put John instead of Jonah. But nonetheless, it's interesting that right off the bat, we see that Jesus, having known or understood events and circumstances and how they would play out, he says, "Thou shalt be called Cephas." Now, I don't know about you, but when somebody introduces me to someone else, and says, this is John, or this is Sarah, or this is Mary, or whoever, most people don't say, "Well, Mary, I think I'm going to call you Sue." You don't see people just changing their names. Now, we know after sort of a friendly relationship develops that we sometimes have nicknames that we use for somebody, for a friend. But right off the bat, when Jesus meets him and he is introduced as Simon, the son of Jonah, Simon is his name. And so that's the way that he would have been referred to. Most people would have referred to him as that. Peter, again, is a name which was given to him by Jesus. And of course, here it says Peter, but we also know that, in the Greek, Peter means stone. And so it kind of describes a lot about Peter. He was a little hard on the outside, a little set in his ways. Sometimes it took a little while to get to him, but once he got a grasp of things, he's pretty set. Years ago, I always think about this. We had a brother down in Hamlin, and he asked me once in class, he said, "Do you know why Jesus picked so many fishermen to be apostles?" I thought he had some kind of deep biblical reason that I'd somehow missed. And I said, "No, not really." And he says, "That's because they're all hard-headed, and they're once you get them set a certain way, it's kind of hard to change their mind." So Peter is one of those. Peter, Andrew, James and John, all of them were partners, it seems, together, worked together in the fishing business. And so we see the foundation of Peter, where he came to be known as Peter, how his name was changed, at least by Jesus, from Simon to Peter, or some people would refer to him as Simon Peter. Instead of Simon, son of Jonah, he came to be known as Simon Peter, Simon the rock, Simon the stone. And of course he does become, some people have made the mistake of believing that the church was established on him as a foundation, and we know that's not true, because Jesus is the foundation and the cornerstone. But we do know that he had a very prominent place in the things of the church. And so he, on the morrow, or the next day, he was minded to go forth into Galilee, and findeth Philip. And Jesus said unto him, "Follow me." Now Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. And so Philip findeth Nathanael. And so here we go again. Philip is introduced to Jesus, and then Philip has people that he wants to introduce Jesus to. And so the process continues. And so, as I said, when we think about the Great Commission and we think about the early days of the church, we think about Jesus sending the apostles forth with what we think of as the Great Commission. The Great Commission per se had really already been in operation for 3 or 3.5 years, because these individuals had been going about introducing people to Jesus, bringing people to Jesus, teaching people about Jesus. And so when the day of Pentecost came, and the gospel's message is presented for the first time formally, the process of how we go about teaching and bringing people to Jesus, that process had already been set in motion, even with John the Baptist, preparing the way of Jesus, and then going forth from there. And of course, we're told that he tells Nathanael, "We have found him of whom Moses in the law and prophets wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." And so he identifies the person that they have found. Now, again, Nathanael is an interesting man. He speaks his mind. That's why I say, when we look at the disciples of Jesus, they all had different personalities. Nathanael is somebody who, don't ask him a question if you don't want an honest answer. Don't talk to him unless you're willing to deal with what he has to say. And, Philip comes and says, we have found him who Moses and the prophets and all of Israel has been looking for. We finally found him, and it's Jesus of Nazareth, who happens to be, again, Jesus bar Joseph, or Jesus the son of Joseph. And again, Nathanael lets that kind of all slip in, Everybody's looking for the Messiah, and everyone was looking for the fulfillment of that. And Nathanael lets that all sink in, that here's a man who comes from Nazareth, and you think that he is the one that, in reality, the whole Old Testament is written about. And so Nathanael said unto him, "Can any good thing come out of Nazareth?" Now, he didn't necessarily insult Jesus per se, but of all the places in all of the earth that you would expect the Messiah to turn up at, Nathanael you can almost see him grinning and shrugging his shoulder like, "Nazareth, really? It's not Jerusalem, it's not Bethlehem, it's not one of the other main cities. It's a guy out of a little town in the midst of nowhere." And that town was in many ways surrounded even by Gentile peoples and others, the Greeks that were around in that area, the Grecians and that influence. And he isn't even from down in Judea. He's not even from the southern part, down around in there. But you're talking about somebody who is up in Nazareth and is in the middle of a place that most people consider, to be an area under the influence of the Greeks. And so he just, you kind of see him shrug his shoulder and kind of smile and like, really? Can any good thing come out of Nazareth? And you'd have to almost ask yourself at the same time what that statement means. Is we could also, word it this way. Has anything ever came out of Nazareth that you would call good? That's what he's really saying. When you hear what little you hear about it, apparently was not good. It wasn't one of those places that apparently gets a lot of positive comments. There's a lot of negativity there. And so here we go. And so we see, some things starting to form up here about these disciples. We see things about Philip and Andrew, and we see here about Nathanael. And so as they're going, Nathanael said unto him, here, and when he comes, Philip said, coming to him and said, "Behold, an Israelite," verse 47, "in whom is no guile." You know, sometimes people don't like people who are very straightforward. You know, most people like people who round the edges off just a little bit. They're a little more discreet in the way that they say things. But it's interesting that Jesus doesn't attack Nathanael for what some could have perceived as a very insulting kind of statement. Rather than, confront him and be insulted by what he says, Jesus kind of encourages him even more. There's one thing, Nathanael, I can definitely say about you. You're not going to just tell people what they want to hear. You're definitely, kind of as in the Old West, you're kind of a shoot from the hip kind of guy. You don't spend a lot of time mulling over the way to do things. And sometimes we can appreciate that. Jesus was a person who sometimes was looked upon as, being a little rough himself around the edges when it came to speaking to people. Sometimes his own disciples would kind of take him off the side and say, "Master, don't you understand that they were offended by the things that you said?" And sometimes when we listen to Jesus, when he's speaking and talking, he seems to be very harsh in his tone. But nonetheless, he's also very honest. And, when you sugarcoat stuff so much that, you can't understand, what's going on, then you got some problems. And it seems that Jesus had a certain admiration for him. Not that he necessarily approved of what could have been an insult. But on the other hand, if that's truly the way Nazareth was, Jesus grew up there. And so Jesus might just as easily looked at him and said, "Yeah, you got that right." And he says, there's no guile. You're truthful in the things that you say. And some preachers, again, sugarcoat and they twist things and they talk around the bush. And when they're finished, nobody's really sure what it was that they were trying to talk about or what they were trying to say. They may have presented it very well, and they may have done it with a PowerPoint, and they may have kept people's attention, but when they get in the car, it's like, what did the preacher say? What was he talking about tonight? I don't know, but it was pretty good. And so that means that the sugar coating's laid on just a bit thick. And so there is some kind of balance in there. And so, there is being hurtful and then at the same time being truthful. And sometimes it's good to have someone who you can count on to just tell you the way it was. And if you've never had the opportunity to have somebody like that in your life, you don't know what you're missing. I had a grandmother who, she said what she thought, and, she asked questions and, stuff that a lot of times people would say, why do you bring that up? And, but nonetheless, she if she didn't like the way something was going, she wasn't going to just go along for the ride and then when the ride was over, talk to everybody else about it. She'd tell you right there on the spot, this isn't working for me, or you shouldn't be doing that. And so she was pretty much straightforward. And so if you were looking for sympathy from her, you had to got it from a Webster's dictionary, because, and if you did something and you got yourself hurt or in trouble, it just wasn't going to work. So again, Nathaniel, that's a characteristic. We know a little bit about Peter. As we said before, James and John, Jesus will call them the sons of thunder. He nicknamed them the sons of thunder. I think they were kind of loud, and I don't know all about them, but when they were around, you knew it. That just seems to be their personality. And here we see a glimpse into Nathaniel that, if you ask me a question, I'm going to give you an answer. Now, you may not like it, but I'll guarantee you it's the answer. And so that's kind of the way he was. And so we can kind of begin to piece together some of the personalities of Jesus' disciples. And so Nathaniel wants to know, how do you know me? How would you know that I'm a person in whom is no guile? Have we ever met before? Have you ever? See, again, here he comes. Where do you get that from? He wants an answer. A lot of people would just let that pass, shake hands, slap backs, that kind of thing. But Jesus makes a statement about Nathaniel, and Nathaniel's, again, he's right back, straightforward in the sense that, he wants to know, where have we met? How is it exactly that you know about all of these things? And so Jesus begins to talk to him about the events that are going on in his life. And so he says, even before I was led to you or knew of you, I saw you under the fig tree. And so he begins to talk to him. He says, I know now, if you saw me then, I didn't see you, I was there. And so he begins to acknowledge or accept the fact that Jesus is indeed the one. If you know that, and if you know these things, then you know that I know that then the things that they're telling me about you is true. Anybody have any questions or comments down through that part? Any observations? I lost my place. Be right back with you. Hang on there. Okay. So as we continue on there, Nathanael answered and said to him, Rabbi, thou art the Son of God, thou art the King of Israel. That's a pretty big statement there. The Son of God, the King of Israel. These are important aspects. If we're talking about who the Messiah was and what the Messiah was going to do and planned on doing and all that was associated with it, then indeed he is. You have to accept it or you have to deny it. He either is or he isn't. And so Nathanael has been told that they found the one who Moses spoke about and the prophets. And if Moses spoke about the prophets, then he's the Son of God, he's the Messiah, he's the one who's going to be the King of Israel. So if Nathanael doesn't believe that, then in his honesty, he has to say, I said I didn't really think anything good could come out of Nazareth, and I don't think now anything good has come out of Nazareth. You haven't changed my opinion. But after he meets him and after he talks to him and about the events that we see here, he is one of those people that, again, he's not going to straddle the fence, because he's one of those people that it's black or white, yes or no. And so it was no, it was kind of leaning toward no, just by what he originally was told. But again, after having spent time with him and talked with him, and we see that term rabbi being used here, which is teacher. And so wasn't maybe quite as formal in that day as it is today, but anyone could be a teacher. Anyone who had disciples was a master or a teacher. And so Jesus answered and said unto him, Because I said unto thee, I saw thee under the fig tree, believest thou? Thou shalt see greater things than these. And he said unto him, Verily, verily, I say unto you, you shall see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. So there are yet many more amazing things. If you think the fact that even though I wasn't anywhere around when you were sitting under the fig tree and when you were saying the things that you were saying about Nazareth and by implication myself, if you think the fact that I knew that, you're really in for a real surprise, because you're going to see many more greater things than just being able to know things. You're going to see literally the heavens open and the angels ascending and descending. And of course, in the Garden of Gethsemane, we know that the angels came and ministered to him. We know, of course, after his temptation in the wilderness, angels came and ministered unto him. We don't really know on what occasions the angels, we know there were a lot of times that Jesus was in the mountain, desolate place praying. We don't know if angels were ascending and descending. We don't get a lot of insight into all of that, but he does promise that he will indeed see those things as a disciple. And so we can pretty much already see that Jesus knows who he's going to select. He knows who's going to be his disciples, and he knows that they're going to be together for a while. And so he's inviting him, indirectly of course, but he's inviting him to become part of this interesting journey of the next 3 or 3.5 years.
In closing this evening, we wish to thank you again for spending your time in study with us. We hope the lesson has been uplifting and motivational. We encourage you to return again for our next lesson. Until then, may we invite you to visit our website. You will find many study opportunities. Our resource page has links to the Gospel Broadcasting Network, a 24/7 station with many great Christian programs and speakers. In Search of the Lord's Way, with Brother Phil Sanders. We have 2 links for Bibles and downloadable software. If you are looking to really expand your knowledge, perhaps you might like to try World Video Bible School, a college-level learning site free of charge. So, until next time, may God bless and keep you in his care as we walk together in his truth. And remember, as always, the churches of Christ salute you.